I'm Clive,
I'm Louis.
and today we're going to be introducing the first webinar, episode 1 in a series of 10, 5 steps to better BIM management. The agenda will be talking about creating a BIM execution plan, talking about how we agree on a clear BIM scope, understanding the sequence between tasks and having your team schedule out those sequences.
Right. Then we'll be managing those tasks, so showing how you can actually execute everything that you've planned for, all the way to verifying against those BIM requirements with the model. So a lot to go over. It's going to be at a high overview, and we'll be going through more detailed information in future webinars.
Absolutely. So the first one, creating a BIM execution plan. Why do we need a BIM execution plan? Well, we're going to borrow the project cartoon here and understand that sometimes people have different views, and this one is how the customer explained it, and then how the BIM consultant described it, how the project was actually documented, what was installed, and then what the customer really wanted was just a tire swing. And this helps us to understand the importance of having a BIM execution plan. We really need to have a common agreement between multiple different teams, different disciplines, so that we can follow the standards and processes to get to the right outcome. Are they optional or are they mandatory?
Are they? Some places they are optional, and we're seeing a lot more mandatory actually. So a lot of governments are now mandating BIM execution plans.
And workflows and standards, and being able to really hone in on what should be done, how it should be done, and rather than everyone following different practices, really important to have the same.
All with the purpose, of course, not just because they want to, but they want to make their projects more consistent.
Absolutely. But why are some BIM execution plans and planning workflows unsuccessful?
Good question. Well, a lot of the feedback that we get on a daily basis sometimes is that their current BIM execution plan process takes too long, and it takes too long to create and manage.
And we also hear that some of them that are created as a PDF and sent on an email, they don't get read, and they get thrown away, or they get discarded, or only seen when there's a challenge, when there's a problem.
Then there's the agreement issue. So here we have mandated BIM execution plans, and not everyone agrees to that. So how can we get that to be more collaborative?
And how do we make sure that it doesn't end up in that drawer and gathering dust? So let's talk about some tips how to have a successful BIM execution planning workflow. The first one is having a central location for all of your team to be invited. We see huge benefit of having an online environment and making sure that everyone has access to the live BIM execution plan.
We see a lot of success also when teams actually build their BIM execution plans together. So instead of it being coming from one person, we see a lot of success and agreement when things aren't as mandated. It's more of a psychological thing.
Yep. We also see an increased engagement when you have good content in there.
Right.
So not having just a plain text document that's PDF'd and completely ignored. Why not add images and video, and actually video saving so many pages of the document, and it's something that somebody actually wants to get interaction with.
Yeah, one of the reasons why no one reads it is because it's so long, but saving a lot of pages with these videos for just training purposes has been so helpful for our customers.
Yep, and embedding also rich information like flowcharts and also iframes. Here we see a Matterport survey, so being able to have an as-built survey or a flow diagram embedded, which is constantly updated for everyone has access to that BIM execution plan. Also, gaining multi-party agreement, trying to have all teams to agree on something is difficult, so you have commenting. And a lot of the time, teams will share a BIM execution plan as a PDF on an email. Some people will print it out and write their notes. Some people will send their notes in electronic form, but they will be all disparate. So keeping those together in the same agreement has been really beneficial for a lot of teams.
Yeah, it's a never-ending cycle when you're trying to agree on an entire document. That could be 50, 60, 120 pages long.
Ouch.
So splitting that up into bite-sized sections. So the commenting, approval workflow, sharing them and publishing them, and being able to comment on each and every single section allows you to just take that into more bite-sized pieces.
And sharing and publishing in those pieces,
right,
and archiving along the way. So having a lot of different gates as you develop in a collaborative form, a document, and then going through an approval process has a lot more advantage in gaining that multi-party agreement that's sought after. So quickly recapping on number one, which was BIM execution planning and helping that to be successful as part of your BIM management workflow. We see huge success when it's online and collaborative. We really see much more buy-in when people's comments are as part of that documenting process and making sure that they are along the ride rather than being disparate and disconnected. And then having an approval process that is actually in bite-sized form, so being able to approve certain parts without approving everything necessarily, and archiving along the way so that we've got security in knowing what versions have been released.
Right. And being able to access it because it's always live.
Always live. So having an online access everywhere is really important.
So a big piece to BIM execution plans is agreeing on a scope as well. So let's jump into that. So why is it that we need to agree on a clear BIM scope? So if we were to ask anyone on any given project, every trade manager all the way down to the designers on the team, they will have a different opinion on what their BIM would look like.
And so getting that agreement is a challenge. And we see some of those challenges are due to having unclear responsibilities, who's responsible for certain parts of the scope. Some of it is due to trying to solve those challenges with complex spreadsheets that cause confusion. And we also end up, as a result, from that confusion, misunderstanding, with missing or duplicate scopes. So those challenges are rife within our industry, and they are things that we would like to present some opportunities or tips on how to agree on a clearer BIM scope.
Right, so here's some tips on how to agree on a clear BIM scope. So we first want to start off with some very basic questions. Who, what, where, when, why, and how. Why are we doing BIM is the first thing we want to start. Well, then that will lead to scope. What scope would be required, how much is actually needed, what is the scope, when is that scope needed, and who is responsible. And once you've figured all these out, then you'll ask yourself, where do we start?
Where do we start? Yeah.
So one of the first things you want to define in a BIM scope is the why. And usually that is a BIM use, a model purpose, a BIM goal. It could be phases or even milestones on a project. Once you've got that, it's very easy to now go through some sort of scope list or create that. So always thinking of why in mind, it's now a matter of what scope is needed to accomplish those BIM uses. Then we can see how much is actually required. So whether we're defining geometry, whether we're defining information, here we can establish that content throughout each of those BIM uses and start answering the real purpose of why we actually need it. And actually, this really leads into more of a lean scope approach.
Packaging those requirements per model use and making sure that we know precisely, rather than in an abstract way, exactly what's required.
And finally, you want to define who's responsible for that scope. And whether it's on a different milestone, whether it's the type of scope that you've added, you want to define that very clearly. And using a scope grid, you'll actually be able to share when those handovers take place. So in many projects, we have examples where content is owned by a certain trade.
This example is, the stairs are owned by the architect early on, and then the structural engineer takes over. And being able to recap on those, we have to understand why. We always start with the purpose. So why are we creating the model in the first place? Being able to, in a visual, we see a lot of teams really responding to a visual grid of not just the information or the accuracy or the geometry, or it's a combination of all of those so that we define what is required by whom, and then be able to assign them so that we can see what the handover is from one team to another. And very importantly, as Louis just mentioned there, making it a lean workflow, making it so that everyone can understand what it is and also be able to deliver on those requirements. So let's take a look at sequencing. Once we've got that clear scope, how would we go about sequencing those tasks? Well, let's first of all ask why. Why would we want to sequence them in the first place?
Good question.
Well, if we get them in the wrong sequence, even if we were to avoid a clash, it still might cost us more money. So the one on the left-hand side, the one that says poor priority, even though there are no clashes, it's going to cost us more money in the bends, in the welds, in the hangers and supports, versus if we had have correctly prioritized the plumbing before the cable tray.
This is a good example of maybe one was actually just a resolution of a clash or some sort of conflict or coordination issue instead of it being sequenced up front and modeled the proper way.
So why is sequencing the BIM tasks such a challenge?
Good question.
Well, sometimes we have isolated teams that are modeling their own scope, and it's very difficult to understand and to influence other people's scope.
Well, we all know we're not all in the same office.
Yep, and you wear blinkers, and it's difficult to have that understanding and know that that's influencing or affecting your own work as well. And when we have that, we end up with out-of-sequence work, where you will end up with rework because of having to move something so that it doesn't clash, it doesn't actually fit, so therefore we have to rework it. And then we know that lean design management workflows are really important, a great concept, but they're new to most people, so they can be a challenge.
They're new to the design side a little bit, more common during construction, so sequencing in construction is very common, but sequencing that in design is new.
Yep. So tips for sequencing those BIM tasks. The first key, and it's a big picture idea, that if we can have a system priority structure setting the foundation, the more important or the less flexible items first, then going through to the more flexible or less costly to route around other things, that would be really beneficial. And also implementing a lean design management workflow and pull planning and phase planning so that we can really get to a sequence to the task level that is assigned to the right party, and we can optimize those. We have a really interesting way of doing that in this pull planning mechanism. One of the key benefits that we've seen in implementing through BIM management is a pull planning sticky note that is not just a sticky note, a blank sticky note. It's actually having a printed card with the exact image of that element that helps other people in the team understand what it is and help sequence around those things. The result usually is a 6-week look ahead that we can understand the dependencies and also understand the notes and the optimum sequence. And we can start to capture those in a visual way. And so we can start to identify where the critical dependencies are, and we can have those tasks assigned to team members as well. The result is we start each team at the right time. With the optimum start date, it means that we are not wasting people's time. We are reducing the amount of rework because they are putting something in the model at the right time in the right place. See me picking up the pace here.
So, quick recap is enhancing the teamwork. So, here, the collaboration is very key. All of us have to agree on a system priority structure. All of us have to be there present for the pull planning. And ultimately, this all reduces the work, and it's very lean. It's a very lean approach when it comes to managing and completing those scheduled tasks.
So let's look at how we actually manage the tasks in a very much a together way. I love this. This is a Dilbert. So when will I get your project status report? Well,
it's a good question. So
you're asking.
Go for it.
You go.
You're asking for a status report.
Or a status report?
Of the status?
I didn't get you that time.
Almost. But one of the key reasons why we need this is that just like with a model, we might have a different opinion as to what the status is. What is 60% complete to me could be very different to Clive.
60% status report versus status report.
Status.
So why is updating the progress such a challenge for teams? Well, we have everyone with their own to-do list.
Yeah, everyone, again, creating their own to-do list in their own isolated environments. And then it's usually up to one person to gather everyone's updates and gather everyone's tasks and see what that progress or that status is.
Yep, that person keeps bugging. Please give me an update.
And then when you do receive that information, it's all questionable. Is it really there? Did they really accomplish their tasks in time? How can we actually check that?
There's another Dilbert cartoon with a random number generator for status reports. Status reports. So the tips for simply updating that and making sure that your progress management is in line. The biggest one that we can recommend, we see people using Kanban boards. It's a simple column-based chart that you can drag and drop cards and understand what the status is of those cards what is in your backlog ready to start working on, what is being prioritized and being in progress, and what's ready for review. You can have lots of different columns to represent those.
But it's not just a Kanban board, it's doing it in one place, in one location. That's the one of the biggest tips that we can give.
Yep, so you're not working with 10 different task lists for everyone.
Right.
And then making sure that the updates are a team effort. So instead of one person being responsible for going around and collecting all of those reports, on the left-hand side of the screen, we see Michelle's tasks that are simply filtered, and that would make it really easy for her to just drag and drop to update her tasks. But yet on the right-hand side, we see Ted. He sees the view of all the tasks as a manager. Makes it a lot easier to understand the progress. And so, as a quick recap,
is one to-do list can help a lot of the team members collaborate and sequence and have really good conversations as to when they can expect content to be completed. Kanban board can help with that process. It could because it's very visual. It's very easy and simple to update progress together. And for someone who is looking for updates, one place, one location, one Kanban board, it's very easy to get project updates, whether it's on the milestone, whether it's on the BIM use, the project by team, or even team member. This kind of approach would really help with that.
And so the last one, the fifth one, is verifying against all of those requirements. Really important to make sure that people are meeting the requirements that have been set. Why? Because if there's one bad apple, one bad model, it can really have a ripple effect and cause a lot of problems for everyone else. If you have missed model content and you're trying to coordinate around it,
or if you've missed content completely and someone will be running a estimation model, cost estimation,
get some quantities and the quantities are off because so having that bad model is a real reason to make sure that you have compliance. But again, why is this a challenge? Why is verifying against those requirements sometimes a big challenge? The original requirements are unclear a lot of the time. In this example, is it a 6 or is it a 9?
Right.
We use lots of disconnected tools, and those don't make it easy for us to bring that data together and check things. And then understanding contracts and how that allocation of risk is assigned is a big, big challenge when somebody is not on the hook for something that is part of their requirements from a BIM perspective. So let's talk about a few tips on BIM compliance.
So the first thing you want to do is prepare and consolidate your requirements. So one of those things might be to organize your requirements, whether they're by team, team member, status, milestone, whatever that may be. You want to just grab all that information. You also want to organize your scope list. Then you want to consolidate or reference all the documents that are related to this. So whether it's a BIM execution plan and referencing other documents or submittals, specifications, you want to consolidate all of those tools or documents. And then gather any kind of notes that would be related that you guys had discussed, whether it was in pool planning sessions, BIM kickoff meetings. So consolidating all of this information and having this in one place, specifically tied to an element, can really help you begin that verification process. Then, of course, listing the requirements by the system element. So this is, again, tying it back to the scope requirements that you initially started, which could be information requirements, LOI requirements, and things like that.
And then we've got all of those requirements that we can verify against the model. So whether it's a model or whether it is a set of 2D drawings, we can review that inside whilst we've got our list of requirements and check off verifying that those tasks have been completed. And the biggest part of this whole workflow is making sure that we get to a model or a set of content, a deliverable that is able to be shared and published. Never sharing something that has not been verified, that has not been checked. So really important that as you go through this workflow and we turn this model from shared to published, we need to make sure that it has met those requirements.
Yeah, you definitely, for someone who is providing a shared model, you definitely want to do your own gate check before you send that off. But someone that's receiving the model, this could be a very helpful tool to check BIM compliance.
So just a quick recap on the BIM compliance side, what the tips are. We say, let's consolidate all of the requirements into one place. Let's make sure that we review every single model before it's released for anybody else. Let's make sure that we can go through that QA checklist and make sure that that's consolidated so that we can make it a lot easier to review and more quick to review before we then go and share and publish that model. So in conclusion, To improve BIM management, we must support all of our teams in agreement so that all teams have agreement to the plan, the original plan.
Creating a lean scope that makes sense to the project in an efficient way. A very lean scope can really help you actually accomplish your BIM execution plan.
And then sequencing and scheduling so that you're actually making sure that the sequence is in a lean and efficient way. We're not adding to and making more rework when we put things in too early. And then as a team, managing the tracking and controlling, making sure that nothing is missed. So trying to consolidate tools and systems so that we can adhere to those requirements as we manage the process. And then
verifying that the model is ready for its BIM use, whether it's for cost estimation, coordination, AR, VR. You do want to make sure that you've met those requirements that were initially agreed by you, by the client, by all parties, but making sure that you really are confident in that model.